Bill Wyman spent 3 decades standing only a few feet away from Keith Richards, long enough for fans to believe the two shared an unbreakable brotherhood. But as the years passed, Bill carried a truth he never dared to say out loud, a truth shaped by silence, exclusion, and a loneliness that didn't fit the public image of a legendary rock band. At 87, he finally chose honesty over nostalgia, revealing that the bond everyone thought existed between him and Keith was never real. And once he opened his mouth, it became clear that the real story of the Rolling Stones was nothing like the myth that survived on stage, the sentence that changed everything. For more than 30 years after leaving the Rolling Stones, Bill Wyman remained astonishingly diplomatic. While fans demanded gossip and journalists looked for fissures between him and the Glimmer twins, Bill always responded with calm restraint, as though protecting a fragile ecosystem. But that changed in October 2024 during the launch of the special reissue of his memoir Stone Alone. When asked directly about his relationship with Keith Richards, Bill did not deflect. He did not joke. He did not hide. Instead, he delivered a single, heavy sentence that ended 3 decades of speculation. "We never truly got along." The room reportedly fell silent. For the first time, he was admitting out loud what had shaped his entire experience inside the Rolling Stones, the distance, the disdain, and the quiet humiliation that had become a daily rhythm behind the world's loudest band. Bill emphasized that he held no resentment, and yet the truth carried an undeniable weight. He explained that he simply couldn't keep pretending anymore, not after decades of scrutiny and misinterpretation. The public had believed the Stones were a tight-knit unit, but Bill revealed that from the earliest days, he was treated like an outsider, tolerated, needed, but never embraced. His confession cracked open a history he had long buried. He described feeling sidelined in the studio, dismissed in meetings, and diminished in ways that rarely surfaced publicly. Even Keith's casual attitude toward him, the way he and Brian Jones once ignored him at a bar, had never quite faded from memory. Bill insisted that his departure in 1991 was not about age, burnout, or a desire for a solo career. It was about dignity. He left because he no longer recognized himself inside a band that expected him to play perfectly, stay quiet, and accept being treated as if his presence were optional. And in 2024, he finally confirmed it. He wasn't willing to pretend anymore, an outsider in the band he helped build. Bill Wyman's story inside the Rolling Stones began with talent and necessity, but also with a subtle fracture that would follow him for decades. Born on October 24, 1936, nearly a decade before Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, Bill entered adulthood while the others were still teenagers dreaming of rebellion. When he joined the band in December 1962, replacing Dick Taylor, he was not only the oldest member, but also the poorest. His childhood in wartime London, marked by rationing, cramped rooms, and uncertainty, had forged a quiet resilience. Yet even with his experience and discipline, Bill sensed immediately that he was stepping into a tightly knit group who saw him as useful rather than equal. From the earliest rehearsals, the band's social dynamic was already defined. Mick, Keith, Brian Jones, and Charlie Watts shared prior friendships, musical histories, and a youthful pack mentality. Bill, who brought better equipment, reliable rhythm, and real live performance experience, became indispensable musically, but socially he hovered on the edge. In private journals from 1962, he wrote a devastating line: "I feel more like a piece of equipment than a member." Though the band maintained a professional front during the mid-1960s, the emotional distance never closed. As the Stones achieved meteoric success with albums like Out of Our Heads, 1965, Aftermath, 1966, and Between the Buttons, 1967, Bill's role remained structurally crucial but personally isolated. He locked down the heartbeat of songs without ever holding the right to shape them. While Mick and Keith established themselves as the public creative forces, cemented by the Jagger-Richards songwriting credit, Bill, along with Brian and Charlie, contributed tirelessly yet invisibly. The situation worsened after the tragic death of Brian Jones in 1969. Bill had always been closest to Brian, seeing in him another misfit inside a machine built around charisma and ego. When Brian died, the internal balance collapsed. During the funeral arrangements and private gatherings, Bill refused to travel with the band on their private jet, a decision that enraged Keith, who equated it with a lack of loyalty. From that moment, the distance between the two men hardened into something quietly permanent. Bill stayed, playing flawlessly night after night, but emotionally, he had already begun planning his exit. The heartbreaking irony was that even as the Rolling Stones evolved into the biggest rock band on Earth, the man who anchored their sound felt smaller and more replaceable every year. The power divide, how money, credits, and control broke the bond. As the Rolling Stones entered the 1970s, the band's internal structure shifted from chaotic brilliance into something more corporate, more controlled, and far more unequal. The Jagger-Richards partnership, both musically and legally, was now the center of the Stones universe. Every songwriting credit, every royalty split, every major decision flowed through Mick and Keith. For Bill Wyman, the imbalance wasn't just visible, it was suffocating. He had been essential in crafting some of the band's most iconic bass foundations, but his contributions were rarely acknowledged publicly and never compensated privately. In his memoir, Stone Alone, Bill revealed that he contributed to the riff idea for Jumpin' Jack Flash alongside Brian Jones and Charlie Watts, yet the song remained credited exclusively to Jagger and Richards. The same pattern held for Satisfaction, Under My Thumb, and countless others. Bill voted to release Satisfaction when Mick and Keith initially resisted, yet he was erased from its story. The financial consequences were devastating. Because songwriting royalties flowed only to Jagger and Richards, they grew exponentially wealthy while the others lived far more modestly. In a 2024 interview with Classic Rock, Bill disclosed a truth that shocked even longtime fans. By the late 1980s, he had fallen into 200,000 pounds of bank debt, despite being a key member of the world's most profitable rock band. Meanwhile, Mick and Keith continued receiving steady publishing income even during years when the Stones weren't touring. To survive, Ronnie Wood began selling artwork to support his family. Charlie Watts, despite being one of the most respected drummers in music history, was not nearly as wealthy as the public imagined. Bill himself took side jobs writing books, selling archival photographs, and quietly hustling to maintain financial stability, all while performing every show, attending every recording session, and fulfilling every promotional duty expected of a full band member. Bill summarized the disparity in one painful sentence. "I made about 1/10 of what they did." The inequality wasn't limited to money. During recording sessions in the 1980s, Bill often arrived prepared, only to discover that Keith or a guest musician had already recorded the bass parts without informing him. He was routinely excluded from meetings about albums, tours, and strategy. When asked how it felt to be cut out of creative decisions, Bill's reply in a later interview was simple and devastating. "I wasn't excluded. I was never invited." The final decade, silence, humiliation, and the moment he walked away. By the late 1980s, Bill Wyman's quiet endurance had hardened into something closer to emotional fatigue. Outwardly, the Rolling Stones were experiencing a triumphant resurgence. The Steel Wheels/Urban Jungle Tour of 1989 to 1990 was marketed as a powerful comeback, a reminder that the band could still dominate stadiums across the world. Fans saw unity, swagger, and ageless chemistry. But behind the scenes, Bill was living a very different reality, one defined by isolation and indignity. During recording sessions for Steel Wheels, Bill often arrived on time, prepared and ready to work, only to spend hours in the hallway or a side room waiting for someone to call him in. Sometimes they never did. More than once, he discovered that the bass line had already been recorded by Keith Richards or by a session musician before he even touched his instrument. He was the band's official bassist, yet treated as though his contributions were optional. The Steel Wheels tour only deepened this divide. Bill performed every night with professionalism and precision, but off-stage, he was left out of planning meetings, production discussions, and even informal gatherings. He was handed schedules, not choices, instructions, not collaboration. "I felt like a fill-in player," he later admitted, "standing on my own stage, but not part of the band." The final blow came in 1989 during the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. Keith Richards gave the acceptance speech. He thanked several people, told stories, and honored the band's legacy. But he did not mention Bill's name once. It wasn't an oversight. It reflected a hierarchy that had been years in the making. Fans noticed. Forums lit up. But inside the band, nothing changed. By 1991, Bill had reached his limit. The Rolling Stones were preparing to ramp up activity again, and Bill knew that if he didn't leave now, he never would. He informed the band, quietly, respectfully, that he was done. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards did not take the news well. In a 2008 interview, Bill recalled the moment with clarity and sadness. Instead of celebrating 3 decades of loyalty, Mick told him, "If anybody has to play bass, I'll do it. Can't be that hard." Keith's reaction was even harsher. "No one leaves this band unless they're in a wooden box." Life after the Stones, freedom, reinvention, and the peace Keith couldn't give him. When Bill Wyman walked away from the Rolling Stones, he wasn't just leaving a job. He was escaping a machine that had consumed more than half his life. For 30 years, the band dictated his schedule, his finances, his stability, and even his identity. But for the first time since 1962, he was free to decide who he wanted to be, and he didn't waste a moment. In 1993, after the Rolling Stones finally acknowledged he had truly left, Bill redirected his energy into the life he had been quietly dreaming of. He formed Bill Wyman's Rhythm Kings in 1997, a band rooted not in ego or global dominance, but in the pure joy of rock, blues, and jazz. There were no stadium pressures, no corporate expectations, and no battles for control. The group performed at small festivals, intimate shows, and modest venues, exactly the way Bill wanted it. Critics praised the Rhythm Kings for sounding like a real band, not a brand, and for the first time in decades, Bill was creating music on his own terms. He also pursued passions that had been waiting patiently in the background: archaeology, photography, and writing. Bill had maintained one of the most extensive private archives in rock history. Thousands of photos, journals, letters, set lists, documents, because he instinctively knew the band would never preserve those memories themselves. His books, including Rolling with the Stones, 2002, became essential historical records for music historians. Despite leaving the band, Bill maintained a loving friendship with Charlie Watts until Charlie's death in 2021. Their bond had always been real, two quiet souls in the middle of a storm. Bill wrote a heartfelt tribute calling Charlie like a brother, in the band and in life. It was the kind of closeness he never had with Keith. Surprisingly, the relationship with the band softened over time. They exchanged birthday and Christmas gifts, and Keith sent Bill scented candles every December, a gentle, almost humorous gesture that hinted at unspoken respect. And in 2016, Keith publicly praised Bill as an incredible bass player, the most discerning, sensitive musician, the top bass player for me. It was the validation Bill had never received while in the band. In 2023, Bill briefly reunited with the Stones to play bass on Live by the Sword for Hackney Diamonds, the last recording to feature Charlie Watts. He agreed not out of obligation, but out of love. It was a final goodbye to Charlie, a closing chapter with dignity. The truth he finally said out loud. For decades, Bill Wyman avoided speaking openly about the emotional undercurrent of his relationship with Keith Richards. He never lashed out in interviews, never fed tabloids, never dramatized their history. He simply walked away and rebuilt his life with quiet dignity. But time has a way of clarifying what we once tried to ignore. And by 2024, Bill was finally ready to acknowledge the truth he had carried since the earliest days of the Rolling Stones. During the reissue event for Stone Alone, when a journalist asked him whether he and Keith had truly been close, Bill no longer shielded the past behind polite ambiguity. His voice was calm, the tone steady, but the meaning unmistakable. "We never truly got along. I can't keep pretending. We're from different worlds." It was the first time he admitted publicly that the distance between him and Keith wasn't just professional, it was personal, ideological, and rooted in decades of subtle disrespect. Bill had been older, quieter, more disciplined, a man shaped by post-war poverty and responsibility. Keith, by contrast, embodied chaos, rebellion, and unchecked instinct. Their lives intersected on stage, but rarely aligned off it. Bill clarified that he held no bitterness. The years had softened old tensions, and he acknowledged that their occasional exchanges, Christmas gifts, birthday messages, were reminders of a bond that existed in its own imperfect way. But he also confirmed what fans had long suspected. The relationship had always been fundamentally strained, and the power imbalance between them had made real friendship impossible. What hurt the most wasn't the arguments. They barely argued. It wasn't dramatic betrayals. There were none. It was the quiet ways Keith dismissed him, ignoring him in early days at the bar with Brian Jones, recording bass lines without telling him, leaving his name out of crucial speeches, treating him like a passenger rather than a partner. Even Keith's own words years earlier revealed the truth unintentionally. "Bill, he's always there, always unobtrusive." It was meant as a compliment. But for Bill, it became the definition of how the band saw him. And so, when he finally spoke that sentence in 2024, it wasn't spite. It was closure. Bill had carried the truth for 30 years. Now he could finally set it down. Bill Wyman spent decades standing beside legends, yet often felt invisible in their shadow. Today, he finally says what he had kept quiet for half a lifetime. But what do you think? Was Bill right to walk away when he did? Tell us your thoughts below, and if you want more stories like this about the Rolling Stones and rock history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for the next deep dive.